Okay, so good morning. I hope everyone is having a pleasant morning today. And near occasions are coming like Diwali, New Year, so everyone will be busy in preparation for those festivals. So, first of all, happy Diwali to all of you because I guess next week we will all be enjoying these holidays. So, yes, audio is working for everyone, and let's discuss what we prepared in our previous session. So in previous session we studied about what is the architecture of Android, how is Android made up of, what are the different layers that our Android operating system is working on based on Linux kernel, what are the different application frameworks. So in previous session we studied the basics of our Android operating system. So yes, I can see in comments that everyone are enjoying about Diwali. So happy Diwali to all of you. So yes, in today's session we will go a little bit deeper in how our Android operating system works. So in previous session, continuing from our previous session, we will also give a link in the description if someone has not joined our previous session, so they can enjoy and they can learn from that previous session that what is the architecture of Android and what are the different components that comprises our Android architecture. And today we are going to discuss different components that are working along with our Android application. So when we develop an application, what are the different components that sync with each other and they can communicate with different apps and different components within an application. So when you build an Android application, it is based on different components. So today we are going to discuss different Android application components. So yes, what are Android application components? So Android application components are basically a building blocks on which we build our Android application. So based on these components, we built our Android application. So when you want to develop an Android app, suppose you want to build an Android application, so these components will help you to build an efficient and user interface, a good user interface, so that and our client or our customer, whoever is going to use our application, should feel that they can use this application on a daily basis. Like for example, let me tell you an example of WhatsApp. Everyone is using that application on a daily basis. So you could build a good application based on using these Android application components. So you can see these components are loosely coupled with our manifest file. We have not studied about manifest file, but we will later on discuss what is Android manifest file. For now, let's just understand that manifest file is a configuration file of our application. So for now, we will just see that this manifest file is just a configuration file. We will learn this file in deep in further session. So there are mainly four application components that are combined together, so to write an Android application. So there are mainly four components which are combined together to make an efficient Android application. So what are those four main components? Yes, the first is activities. Activities represent a single screen of a UI, like when you design your Android application. So a single screen, what you see on your mobile screen, it represents as activities. So you can make an application with multiple activities. But when you see a single screen on your mobile device, it represents a single activity. Then we see services, like for example music services. So when you are doing some task and you want to minimize this task and do some other work, but while you are listening some music. So when you are listening some music and doing some other tasks, so listening the music is a background service, like that services can run on background while you are doing some other task. So when you want to use this type of services, you can use it in your Android application. Then the third component is broadcast receivers. So like for example, let me tell you, when you are registering for your WhatsApp, when you are installing WhatsApp, they will send you an OTP, that will a code that is used for logging in and fetching your data from their server. So it is a broadcast. That broadcast how we receive from our SMS app, because that OTP will be sent in our SMS application. So when we want to use or communicate two or more applications with each other, when we want to use two different applications with each other, we can use broadcast receivers. And the last is content provider. So what are content providers? So when we want to fetch some data from server, the content providers are like our courier services. They take our data from server to our mobile device and will also take data from our mobile device and provide those data to our application servers. So content providers are like our courier services. They can take parcel from you and provide that parcel to the destination, and similarly vice versa, they will take parcel from the other destination and courier that to your house. So that is the main purpose of content providers. So let's start with our first component, that is activities. So activity, as I told you, that it represents a single screen with a user interface. Like when you are designing an Android application, so when it represents a single screen means whatever you are designing, that means you want to put a label, you want to put an image, you want to put a button, so anything whatever you want to display on your screen, on a single screen, it is represented as a single activity. You can use multiple activities in your Android application. So in Android programming, we say activity is a single design. Like in HTML, when you design a home page is a single app, that is a single screen that is displayed to the user. So similarly, like home page in HTML, we can use activity as a single screen in Android application. So this activity performs action on the screen. So whenever we want some actions to be performed, like you want to click some button, you want to send a text message, you want to play some videos, or you want to listen some music, anything, any actions that you want to perform on the screen, it is performed through an activity. So for example, an email application, let's take an example of email application which has just one activity that shows a list of emails. You can take Gmail, like you can look Gmail in your mobile phones, and whenever you open Gmail from your phone, the list of new emails are shown at the top of the list. So similarly, like that is an activity for email address. And when you want to compose an email, that when you want to send some email to some other person, so when you want to compose that activity, you can have another activity for just composing, where you have to mention the email address you want to send to, from which email address do you want to send the email. So you can use multiple activities in a single application. Let's take an example of Java code. When you start programming in Java code in Android application, so we have discussed in our previous session that it follows OOPS concept, that is object oriented programming. So it will be based on class and object. So you can see our main activity is a class which extends another class, that is activity. So this is the Java code that we can use for programming in activities. Then moving on to our second component, that are services. So service runs in the background as I told you, when you are listening to some music and performing some task, it is working in the background and long running operation. Let's give me another example. Many of you might be playing some games like you can play Call of Duty, PUBG, even Candy Crush. So when you are playing that game, our application is fetching some data from server that is in background. So in background that are long running, because you will be playing that game for long time. So for that long purpose you can use services. At that time the services do not interrupt your application, because services will work in background. It will not show the user that these tasks are being performed. So whenever you want something to be used in background, you can have multiple services. So for example, you might play music in background while browsing through different applications, or while you are using some internet or browsing internet or websites. So that is an example of a background service which is not shown to the user. User might not see the screen of what music is being played or what video is being played, but you are just listening to the audio through background services. It might also fetch data over the internet. As I told you, while playing games, you can fetch some data over the internet which is running in background. So you can also use services like this in our application. So let's see the example of how Java code is used in service. So as I mentioned, it is a class, public class my service. When you want to implement a service in your application, so you have to write this Java code in your activity.java class Java file, and you can use this code to make a service in your application. Then moving on to our third component, that is broadcast receiver. So what are broadcast receivers? So broadcast receivers simply respond to the broadcast messages. So let me give you an example for that too. While you are using a WhatsApp, someone is sending you a message. You immediately get a notification in your screen and notification bar that someone has sent you a messages. So when you are seeing that notification, that is due to a broadcast receiver in your application. That receiver continuously monitors that if you are getting any notification or a broadcast or not. So based on those broadcast receivers, you are getting a notification from even from other applications, like when you are sending an OTP. So OTP is also being fetched in our application in WhatsApp, that yes, this number is valid, and now you can use WhatsApp in your Android device. So application can also initiate a broadcast. Initiate means you can also send a broadcast, not just receiving. You can also initiate or send a broadcast to let other applications know that some data has been downloaded to the device and is available for them. Like you can use a broadcast for your like SMS service. In our SMS services, they initiate broadcast that an SMS is received, and if some application is using the SMS receiver, they can check that OTP has been received in our application. So SMS service is the best example that is initiating a broadcast. So to implement a broadcast receiver in our application, we have that activity.java file. In that Java file, we have to write this public class receiver that is extending our class broadcast receiver. So when we are inheriting, you must be familiar with the word inheritance. You have already studied in C, C++, Java. Many programming languages support inheritance. So extends keyword is used to inherit those broadcast receiver components in our class. So our class is my receiver, that is inheriting the properties from broadcast receivers that is inbuilt, made in Java, specially designed for Android. And then there is a method for on receive. That means whenever you receive a broadcast, whatever task you want to perform will be written in this method. that public void on receive. Whenever you receive a broadcast, whatever you want to perform that task, like when you receive a notification or a message, what you want to do with that notification. So you can write that code here. So this is our third component, broadcast receiver. And moving on to our fourth and the final application component, that is content provider. So a content provider component supplies data from one application to another, but only on request. When one application requests a data from another application, like whenever you are using Instagram and you have already logged into Facebook, like you are using Facebook application in your mobile phone, you have already logged in with your email ID and password, and you are installing another application, Instagram. So Instagram will fetch the login information from Facebook, and it will suggest you that do you want to log in with this name. So because Instagram and Facebook by operated by same server, that's why they have multiple applications requesting data from another application, but only when you request it. So Instagram will request data from Facebook that this email ID will log into Instagram and your username will be by default fetched by Instagram. So that way component providers also work with each other. Let me give you another example for that. You all might be using Zomato or Swiggy for food ordering. Yes? So when you use that type of application and when you go for payment options, when you order food and when you go for payment options, you will see a notification for Google Pay, UPI, multiple applications. So whenever you click on that application icon, that if you want to pay with Google Pay, so when you click on Google Pay application will open for paying your order bill. So you have requested Google Pay to open their application and complete the payment process. That is also work of a content provider. That when you want to request another application to complete your task, so that is provided by our application component, that is fourth one, content provider. Such requests are handled by the methods of the content resolver class. There is an inbuilt class in our Android database, that content resolver class. This class will handle all those types of methods that you want to implement in your application. So the data may be stored in a file system, the database, or somewhere else. That means you can have a local database or a server database. Local database, for example, SQLite. As we have already studied in Android architecture, that there is a database for SQLite, and you can also use Firebase, that is solely based on server, that your data will be stored on server. So to implement content provider in our application, there is an inbuilt class called content provider. You can see the nomenclature, the C and P will be capital. So you can rename your class, public class, whatever you want to write your class name, that will inherit the properties of content provider, and you can use the inbuilt method onCreate, and then you can implement whatever the code you want to write, that whatever the action you want to perform. When you receive the content, you have to perform some task, that you want to save those data, you want to use the username in your application, you want to send those data to your servers. So whatever the task you want to perform, you can use content provider class in your application. So now let me ask you a question, that which application components will represent a single screen? That when we want to start programming in our Android application, which component will represent a single screen? Those who know the answer, they can write in comment section. I am currently looking at the comment sections, and those who know the answer, they can comment and give me an answer for those, that which of these four application component a single screen is represented, that a user can see a single screen. So Rocky Patel content provider will just give us some content on the screen. So whenever we want to represent our screen, we want to show some design to the user, that which application component will show a single screen to the user or our customer. So let me give you the correct answer. So the correct answer is yes, Nishu Singh, you gave the correct answer that these are the activities. Activities give you a single screen user interface, that whatever you want to display contents on your single screen, that is through some activities. So when you want to provide data to user through some activities, you can use activity class. We have already seen that my activity will extend an inbuilt class called activity. So an activity in Android application will represent a single screen of our Android application. So now let's moving on through additional components, that we have already seen the 4 basic components that are used in Android application. Those 4 are the basic components that every Android application can implement those 4 application component. But along with those components, there are multiple additional components. So which are those additional components? So we can use these additional components as well to enhance our application. So you can see many applications show some pop-up for login, that they do not use an entire activity for login but a single portion of the screen. Like for example, you have used Paytm application use a little bit portion of a single application activity for login purpose only. So they are using fragments. That is an additional component called fragments. It will just use a smaller portion of your activity and it will show like a pop-up, that when you want to log in, those pop-up for login user ID password will open, and whenever you complete your login, you are redirected back to your activity. So those are called fragments of the screen. So it will represent a smaller portion of our user interface. And there are multiple views, that it is a user interface element that are drawn on screen, that you want to draw something on screen like buttons, list, text view, edit text. So multiple elements are available to design our app. So for designing, you can use multiple views that are previously inbuilt and available in our Android application. And the third additional component are layouts. So what are layouts? They are predefined screen format. Layouts are predefined screen format that are used to give a direction to our elements. That there are multiple layouts like linear layout, relative layout, table layout. So multiple layouts you can use as per your screen format. Like if you want to show a data in a tabular data, that is row and column. If you want to show some activity in the format of rows and columns, you can use table layout. If you want to show some data in the form of horizontal and vertical orientation, like when you want to insert a text box and another button, so button will placed directly underneath that edit text. So if you want to show some that type of layout, you can use linear layout. But if you want to use some drag and drop, that when you want to drag an component like a button or edit text, you can just drag and drop, and there will be a certain distance that you want to place that element on a certain distance from each other. You can use relative layout. So as per your requirement of your application, that I want to design this application on a certain format, so you can use different layouts in your application activities, and you can use multiple layouts on multiple activities. Like there is no fixed format for every activity. You can use one layout in one activity, another layout in another activity. So that is sole purpose of a designer, that how you want to design your application. And the fourth are intents. Intents are nothing but when we want to redirect from one activity to another. Like when you log in, you want to pass your username password to another activity. So when you want to pass some data from one activity to another, you can use intent. And the fifth one is resources. Resources are like string content, like your application name. That is a resource. Some country names, some state names that are predefined, like which country do you belong to. So you can have a predefined array for those resources that are string. And for constants, like there is a fixed value for pi. So pi's fixed value is 3.14, that is a constant. So you can have those constants in your file as well. So you can use along with some drawable pictures, like you want to use some pictures or some images in your applications. So they are called resources of your file. So those resources you can store in a file, and you can use those resources whenever you need them in your application. And the last is manifest file. So as I told, manifest file is the configuration file for our application. So we will discuss this manifest file, that how we can configure our application with this manifest file. It is the most important file in our application, which will contain all details of our applications, how many activities we are having, what are the other things that are configurable in our applications. You can also configure your Android application through this manifest file. So how we can do that? Let's check our Android manifest file. So here is an example of Android manifest file. This is just an example of a manifest file to let you know what are the different tags that are used in our Android manifest file. So let's start off with our left hand side is the top side and the right hand side is the bottom side. So to give you a view of the full file, I have divided the file into two parts, into left and right. So left side is the top part of our file and right side is the bottom part of our file. So when we start, you can say the package name, what is the version of your application, and the name. You have seen multiple versions of all the application. So when you first create your project, so the first version will be 1.0. That will be the starting version of your application. You can see versioning of all those applications. Whenever you give an update, you upgrade that application, the version changes. So you can provide versioning based on our manifest file. Every time you create a new version, here the version name will change 1.0, 2.0 or 1.1 based on your code change. Then there are different SDKs. SDK are software development kit, that which version you are going to use for our application development. So currently I guess we are using Android SDK 28 and 29, that is Android Pie. Android Pie, Android Oreo, Android Q is also available, but most of the programming we are doing on Android Pie version. So that is SDK level version 29. So whenever we want to upgrade our SDK version, we can upgrade it from our manifest file, that you have programming in Android Pie version or Android Nugget or Android Oreo. Android has different versions of programming. So whichever version you want to program, you can here give you a minimum SDK that will support your application. So many times when you see an application in Play Store, you will see that this application does not support your device. That is, their minimum SDK version will be higher than what you are having in your mobile device. So you can set it from in manifest file that our application will use this minimum SDK version. Target SDK version will be the maximum version that will be supported in your device. Like you have maximum supported version of Android 29, that means any application having Android Q will not support this Android Pie version. So you can also set minimum SDK and maximum SDK in your manifest file, and then configuration will be coming on to our application, like what will be the icon for your application. So you can set your icon. Every application have their own different icon, so you can set your application icon from here. Also label your application name. You have your application name in a string file, so you can also set your application name here, and along with the theme. Everyone will create their own theme for their application. So when you have a predefined theme for your application, you can use it in style app theme. Then there are different activities. So currently here I am only using one activity, that is main activity, the first activity when we create a project. So this project contains only one activity. But if you are having multiple activities in your project, here will be the list of all those activities. So when the activity tag comes, it will represent a single activity in our project. So first will be the name of our activity and what is the label that is coming on with our activity. And inside that activity tag, there is a tag called intent filter, which is the main tag. When you use intent filter for an activity, that will represent the launching activity. So when you put an intent filter in another activity, that activity will launch first when you open that application. So whenever you open an application, for example, when you open WhatsApp, you see a screen that displays all your chats. So intent filter will be put in that activity. Suppose when you want to open Facebook, you directly want to open messaging without going to home feed. So in that messaging activity, you can put the intent filter, and that messaging activity will open whenever you click on Facebook application. So intent filter is the most important tag in our manifest file, that whenever you want to create an activity as a launcher activity, that whenever you want to open an application and you want to put that activity first on top of this tag, you will use intent filter in that activity. And similar like XML coding, we have to close all those tags. So we are closing intent filter, then we are closing activity, and at last we are closing the application tag. So similarly, when we open a tag, we also have to close those tags. So at last our manifest file will complete. So this is the main configuration file of our Android application. Whenever you create a project in Android Studio, every project will have their own Android manifest file that will contain all details of your project. You can configure your whole project in this manifest file. Ready? So what are the different elements in our Android manifest.xml? It is an XML file. So the code will be following the XML nomenclature. So XML nomenclature says that whenever you open a tag, you should close that. So the first root element, that will be the root tag. The top of the stack will be a manifest tag. Inside every configuration file, so whatever we want to configure in our application will come under manifest tag. So under those manifest tag, there will be an application tab. It is a sub element of our manifest tag, and it will also have several sub elements. We have already seen activity, intent filters, that are the sub element of our application. So then we will have an activity tag. So how many activities we are having in our project will be represented by activity. So every activity, every screen in our mobile phone will have their own activity tag. So it is a sub element of our application, and whichever activity you want to use as a launch mode, that means whenever you open or click on the icon of that app activity, so whenever you click on an app icon, you have to launch an activity that will be your launcher activity. So for that you have to put an intent filter. So intent filter is the sub element that we have to put within an activity. So whenever you want to create an activity as a launcher activity, you can use intent filter within that activity tag. And for the use of services and broadcast receiver, we have already seen what are services, what are broadcast receivers in our application components. So whenever you want to use those in an activity, you have to put intent filter in that activity tag. And the last are actions and category. So whenever you want to perform some actions and you want to give a category name, that for example login, all the activities that will be used for login will have a category name login. You can give a category name to every activity, and whatever actions you want to perform in an intent filter, you can use it in action tag. So that is the main use of our Android manifest file. So yes, which tag in our manifest file will launch our activity as main activity. So I have already mentioned that which tag will be used as to put our activity as a launcher activity. So whenever we want to put an activity in launch mode, we can use this tag within an activity to put it as our launch mode activity. So can anyone give me RDX gaming? Yes, RDX gaming, you are right. You can use intent filter for our activity to put it in a launch mode. So whenever you want to put an activity in a launch mode, you can use intent filter within those activity and put that activity on a launch mode. Yes, Ruchi, you are also right. So you can use intent filter within that activity to put it as a launch mode. So yes, now do anyone have any questions regarding today's session? If you have any questions, you can ask me. I am currently looking at the comment section, that is anyone having any questions regarding today's session, they can ask questions right now. Okay, Parth Patel, okay, no questions. So let me just wait for everyone to finish if they have any questions or not. And if you liked today's session, it would be great thanks from you that you could like this session if you have already understood and you liked this session. Can we create codes from Android in Notepad++? Yes, Rocky, you can create a code in Notepad++ in Java file. And when you create .java, you can create that Notepad++ file with .java extension and put that .java file in our Android project folder. When you put that Java code in a project folder, that will be directly implemented in your project that is imported in Android Studio. So Rocky, you can use Notepad++ for coding in Java. So I guess I have answered that question. Okay, so thank you all for joining today's session. I hope we will have more interaction in our next session and we will dig deeper into the ocean of Android programming. Ready? Okay. So I guess thank you all for joining today's session. And if you want to see more upcoming Android sessions, you can subscribe to this channel. We will also having more Android sessions on this channel. And if you liked today's session, you can give a like, and thank you all for joining today's session. So thank you all.